Hi everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Europe in a Warming World. My name is Gigi, and I'm here with Regina and Dacia.
Today, we're gonna talking about a topic that honestly affects all of us, not only in Europe, but around the world, climate change.
But in the case of the European Union, climate change has become something extremely urgent. It's no longer a problem for the future, it's something people in Europe are living with right now, every year and every real way.
Yes, climate change has become one of the biggest challenges for the EU. In the past few years, Europe has had extreme heat waves, massive wildfires, serious flooding, and strong storms, and also long droughts.
These events are not random anymore. They happen more often and they are stronger than before. Scientists say that in Europe, temperatures are rising faster than almost anywhere else in the world.
And what's important is that these climate problems don't only affect nature, they affect everything: people's health, water supply, food production, transportation, tourism, jobs, and even political stability.
For example, heat waves increase hospital visits, floods destroy homes, and droughts hurt farmers. All of these create pressures on governments and on the European Union as a whole.
Exactly, and something we want to highlight today is that climate change is not only an environmental issue. It has become a security issue and a political challenge. For the EU, it affects energy, international relations, and the way countries cooperate with each other.
For example, after the war in Ukraine, Europe suddenly realized how dangerous it was to depend on fossil fuels, especially from Russia.
So, in this podcast, we want to explain three main things and clear in a simple way.
What is happening in Europe right now because of climate change?
What is the role of the European Union in responding to this crisis?
And how effective or ineffective are the US actions so far?
Well, we also want to connect these two important concepts.
The idea of the EU as a normative power and the use of the Common Foreign and Security Policy, or the CFSP.
Our goal is not only to describe what is going on, but also to think critically about it. The EU promises a lot, and it has many plans, like the Green Deal and the climate law. But the big question is, are these actions enough for the scale of the crisis? That's something we will explore together.
So, thank you for joining us. We hope this podcast helped you understand the situation better and maybe reflect on how climate change is truly shaping Europe today.
Let's start by looking at the current situation and what climate change actually looks like in the European Union right now.
So, to really understand how big the problem is, let's talk about what climate change looks like right now in Europe. One of the clearest signs in the extreme heat. In the last few years, countries like Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece had summers with temperatures over 40 and even 45 degrees Celsius.
These heat waves are not just uncomfortable, they are dangerous. People get sick, hospitals get full, and other workers struggle to do their jobs safely.
Yes, and the heat also causes droughts, especially in the southern Europe. Rivers are drying, lakes are shrinking, and the farmers don't have enough water for their crops. In Spain and Italy, some areas even had to limit how much water people could use.
And when crops fail, food becomes more expensive, so climate change affects everyday life in ways we don't always think about it.
And then we have the other extreme flooding. A few years ago, Germany and Belgium had some of the worst floods in the history. Entire towns were destroyed because it rained so hard that rivers overflowed.
Scientists say that these floods are happening much often because the air is warmer, and warmer air holds more moisture. So, when it rains much more.
We also need to talk about the wildfires. In Greece, Portugal, and Spain, massive fires have burned thousands of hectares of land. These fires are becoming more common because the heat rise the forest, making them burn faster and easier.
Some fires are so big that firefighters from the other EU countries have to travel there to help.
Another important part of the context is energy. Before the war of Ukraine, Europe depended heavily on Russian natural gas. But when the war started, Europe had to find new sources of energy.
This made climate change even more complicated because Europe wants to move away from fossil fuels, but it also needs energy security.
So the context is basically this. Europe is facing heat waves, fires, droughts, floods, stronger storms, higher food prices, and energy problems. All of these are related to climate change.
And that's why the EU has to take stronger actions, because climate change isn't just an environmental problem anymore. It's a social, economic, and political problem too.
Now, let's talk about what the EU is doing. The EU likes to describe itself as a normative power, which means it tries to influence the world through values and rules, not through military force.
Climate change is one of the areas where the EU tries to lead by example.
One of the biggest plans in the European Green Deal.
The idea is to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050.
That's a huge goal.
To get there, the EU wants more renewable energy, cleaner transport, better building efficiency, sustainable fuel systems,
and protection of ecosystems.
Then there is the Europe Climate Law, which makes the goals legally binding. That means countries must follow them. The EU has a goal to reduce emissions by the least at 55% by 2030.
And the plan to achieve it called Fit for 55. It includes things like
reducing pollution from cars,
encouraging electric vehicles,
charging companies for the emissions they produce,
increasing the amount of energy that comes from wind and solar.
Speaking of the charging companies, the EU has the emission trading system. Big industries have to pay for the pollution they emit.
The more they pollute, the more they pay.
This makes them want to reduce their emission because polluting becomes more expensive.
Now, climate change is also a global issue. So the EU used diplomacy through the Common Foreign and Security Policy, CFSP.
The EU goes to international conferences, negotiate climate agreements, and give financial support to developing countries so they can adapt to climate change.
And after the war in Ukraine, the EU also has created the Repower EU, a plan to stop depending on Russian energy and move faster towards the renewables.
This is where climate policy and security policy come together. The EU wants energy that is both clean and safe.
So overall, the EU is trying to lead with laws, investments, and international cooperation. But the question is all of this enough?
Yes, and renewable energy in Europe is growing fast. Wind and solar energy are becoming cheaper and more common.
In fact, in some months, renewables produce more electricity in Europe than fossil fuels.
That is a big achievement.
But of course, there are problems. One problem is political unity. Not all EU countries agree on how fast the transition should be. Countries like Poland depend on the coal and worry about losing jobs. Others, like Hungary, disagree with the EU for political reasons. When countries doesn't agree, decisions take much longer.
Another problem is money.
The green transition costs a lot.
Richer countries like Germany or the Netherlands can invest easily, but poorer EU countries struggle.
If the EU wants a transition to be fair, it must support all countries equally.
Also, climate change is happening faster than EU policies. Fires, floods, and heat waves keep getting worse, but political decisions move slowly because they require negotiation, votes, and approval from many different governments.
Although the EU countries has common climate agenda and provides more funding to countries with fewer resources, those funds do not cover all the costs to transition. They eliminate differences in administrative capacity and national priorities. Therefore, despite the financial support, each country advances with different capabilities.
And when the EU faces a crisis like the war in Ukraine, climate goals sometimes have to slow down. For example, some countries reopen coal plants because they need to energy quickly. This shows how fragile the transition can be.
Another thing to consider is consumption. Europeans consume a lot of energy and resources. If EU really wants to lead the world, it also needs to change everyday habits and lifestyle, not only make laws.
So yes, the EU is doing a lot, but the big question remains.
Will it be enough?
The answer depends on how fast and how united Europe can be in the next decade.
So, to finish this podcast, we want to reflect a little deeper on what we discussed today.
Climate change is clearly one of the biggest challenges for Europe.
It is already affecting people's lives, the environment and the economy, even political stability. And honestly, the situation is not improving fast enough.
I agree. The European Union does have strong plans, like the Green Deal, the Climate Law, Fit for 50, and the CFSP. On paper, these plans are very ambitious and they show that the EU wants to be a world leader.
The EU likes to present itself as a nomadic power, meaning it wants to lead by example and inspire others with its values.
But when we look at what is really happening on the ground, the process is slower than what the science demands.
Exactly. The science keeps telling us that the next 10 years are crucial, but Europe still moves in a very political and bureaucratic way.
Countries argue, negotiations last months or years, and sometimes decisions have to be weakened just to get everyone agree.
And while all this is happening, the climate crisis is speeding up, not slowing down, and it feels like nature has more faster timeline than the governments.
Another problem is the gap between goals and reality. For example, the EU says it wants to reduce emissions by 55% by 2030, but many countries are not on track.
The EU wants to stop using fossil fuels, but the energy crisis. Some countries reopen the coal plants.
The EU wants more renewable energies, but permits for wind and solar still takes too long.
So the ambitions are high, but the actions are not always strong enough.
Also, we need to talk about fairness. The transition is not the same for every country. Richer countries like Germany, Sweden, or Netherlands can invest more money in green technologies. But poorer countries struggle because in transition is expensive.
If the EU wants real unity, it must support all member states equally. Otherwise, the transition will create more inequality, and that's dangerous socially and politically.
Another critical point is that the EU sometimes tries to act like a climate hero internationally, but its own consumption patterns are part of the problem.
Europeans consume more energy and resources per person than most of the world.
So, if the EU wants to be a global example, it also needs to change lifestyles, not only just laws.
And let's be honest, being a leader also means accepting responsibility. Europe industrialized early and contributed a lot to the global emissions. So now, it has a moral duty to push hard for solutions, not just comfortable or easy policies.
Exactly. And leadership requires courage. The EU cannot keep making climate policies that avoid conflicts or try to please everyone.
Big changes always require resistance, but doing nothing or doing too little will cost much more in the long run.
So, our final thought is this. The EU is progressing, but its climate action is still constrained by the uneven priorities, capacities, and political commitments of its member states. The Union has financial instruments, regulatory frameworks, and coordination mechanisms that allow it to move forward, but these tools can only go as far as the level of agreement and a vision that governments are willing to support.
And if the EU can do that, it can act with more urgency, more unity, and more honesty. Then Europe has a real challenge of building a safer and more sustainable future.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Europe in a Warming World. We hope this conversation not only inform you but also encourage you to think critically about what still needs to be done. Thank you and goodbye!